My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. The Rugrats takeover rolls on, this week jumping to a Nintendo home console for the first time with Rugrats Scavenger Hunt.
We're on a baby hunt, and don't think we don't know how to weed them out.
It was also known as Rugrats Treasure Hunt in Europe. I guess they thought Europeans wouldn't know what a scavenger is. It was released on June 29, 1999, exclusively for the Nintendo 64. This was the first Nickelodeon game to grace the Nintendo 64, and it's the third different console Rugrats has had an exclusive game for so far. I think it's interesting that they're going for the exclusive games for each individual console strategy. Unless there's something I'm missing, I don't see any real reason why these console games couldn't have been on both Nintendo and PlayStation. Our developers here were Real-Time Associates, who you'll remember from Real Monsters. Outside of the idiotic decision to make the level select and password system impossibly hard to utilise, that was a pretty solid game, especially compared to the other Nick games of that era. They'd also had a tiny bit of experience with 3D game development, having been the studio to work on porting Gex Enter the Gecko to the Nintendo 64 a year prior. Unfortunately, Scavenger Hunt was not well received upon release, leading to a miserable 5.3 average review score. This actually makes it one of the lowest rated Rugrats games, placing it just ahead of Royal Ransom and Totally Angelica. Could we possibly scavenge up a diamond in the rough here? If you're going into this review almost completely blind, like I was, you might be surprised to learn that Rugrats Scavenger Hunt is a board game. However, don't be fooled into thinking we're in for a minigame filled romp like Mario Party or the GOAT Crash Bash. I'll touch on this more in a second. Players have 3 separate game boards to play on, each technically being a different game. You've got Angelica's Temple, Pirate Treasure Hunt, and Reptar Rally. Not exactly a whole lot of content, particularly for a game in this genre. Just like the title of the actual game, all of these game boards have different names for the European version. This seems very unnecessary. Scavenger Hunt wastes no time pushing you into setting up a game. Right away you'll be choosing what you want to play, with a couple of additional options that alter the gameplay. The first 2 games have an option to toggle hidden squares on or off. Absolutely no clue what this means, so I guess I'll leave it in the default position. Then, once you've chosen the specific board you want to play on, you can also determine the size of it with small, medium and large options. Finally, you pick which baby you want out of Tommy, Chucky, Phil and Lil, and then you're into the gameplay. I decided I'd play in the standard order the game presents the boards in, so first up for me was Angelica's Temple. As this was starting up, I got a brief explanation of the game. Here the babies need to collect all of the broken statue pieces before Angelica finds her piece. It's very brief and very vague, not really telling me much about what I'm actually doing here. I was also surprised to learn that this game was collaborative. Instead of trying to specifically win the game myself, I was working with 3 other AI players to beat Angelica. This caught me off guard at first, but now that I look back on it, it's kind of a cool idea in theory, and a pretty good way to change up standard board game gameplay. Once things actually started though, I was unbelievably confused. I never thought board games based on Rugrats could be so damn confusing. I took my first turn spinning the step counter wheel thing. I then found myself wandering around a game board that has a million different types of spaces for you to land on. The first space I landed on was a search space, which turned out to be the most important space you can land on. Landing on one of these allows you to search a number of objects in the room to try and find the highly sought after pieces. Sometimes you'll find the pieces, sometimes you'll find nothing, and other times you'll find items that can assist you on your quest, like the ability to search twice in one go. It makes a little more sense to me now, but at the time I was seriously stunned by this game. It seemed like there was so much happening and none of it was explained. Once I ended my turn and the other babies started going, it was like I had been plonked on another planet filled with aliens. Nothing was making sense to me. So Chucky, Phil and Lil have their turns and then Angelica gets her turn. Makes sense since we're actively playing against her. But then all of a sudden Grandpa Lou and Spike are playing too? Are they on Angelica's team? Are they evil? Should I actively be avoiding them? Like I said earlier, there's a million different spaces you can land on, which makes the game feel overwhelming at the start when you have no idea what they do. Going in blind, I was hoping for some cool Mario Party minigames, but there aren't any. This is straight up just a board game, aka the least interesting part of every Mario Party game ever made. Most of the spaces you land on will have something to do with two counters every character has: energy and cookies. What does the energy do? What do the cookies do? I had no idea. The game doesn't explain anything to you. Imagine if an actual physical board game did this. Like, you crack open Monopoly for the first time in your life as a kid, and the only instructions are don't go bankrupt. It seems like a rules or tutorial section would be a pretty basic thing to include in a video game specifically about board games. About halfway through my first game, it started to sink in. This truly wasn't going to be the fun Mario Party clone I had hoped it would be. Even worse though is that the first board game just doesn't really have much going for it. The extent of the gameplay seemed to be rolling the dice, landing on a search square, and then crossing your fingers that you find another piece. There really isn't much strategy happening here. At its simplest, Monopoly really is just a game where you repeatedly move around in a loop, but all the buying and building creates strategy. You can kind of see real-time associates attempting to inject this strategy into Angelica's temple, but it's completely missing the mark. The energy and cookies are clearly supposed to be these game-changing elements, but they're not even slightly interesting. After like 30 minutes, I was still struggling to figure out what these things even did. Running into Angelica would make you lose cookies, but that didn't seem to have much of an effect. In fact, characters hitting 0 on their cookie counter had no effect at all. A piece of random dialogue from Lil during the game implied that the cookies were used as currency to perform searches. If that was the case, then it seemed like some actual strategy had been injected and the cookies served a purpose. But then at one point I had 0 cookies and could still search, so clearly that was wrong? I'm so damn confused. Much later in my playthrough, I came to the conclusion that cookies literally just exist to be converted into more energy. The energy stuff made slightly more sense. Points are spent every time you do something, and hitting 0 on that sees Stu or DD come along and put that particular baby down for a nap. This takes you off the game board, and it essentially makes you miss an entire turn. While this might seem like a penalty, it isn't all that big of a deal. The game isn't fast paced enough for missing a single turn to really matter. In fact, deliberately draining your energy or landing on one of the squares to go to the crib is usually a smart idea. This nap completely refills your energy, generally being way more efficient than wasting turns landing on energy squares or cookie squares that don't fill the counter up as much. On top of that, after you free yourself from the crib, you get free reign to choose where on the board you want to re-enter. This is an extremely efficient way to maneuver yourself to where you need to be without taking a bunch of turns. In a way, the energy aspect does create some kind of strategy, just not even remotely in the way the developers intended. There was also the mystery square, where Dill appears out of nowhere in the Reptar wagon and just yeets the entire game board. Overall, as you can probably tell, I didn't enjoy this first game. However, I will give it maybe a slight compliment. I could see this being a bit of fun if you had a full team of 4 humans to play against Angelica. Working as a genuine team to take her down sounds like it would work so much better and would actually introduce strategy elements. With AI teammates, you're spending an eternity watching other people take their turns, just randomly moving around with no genuine purpose. It takes way too long to play through a single game on the medium board, even with 4 players trying to nab all the pieces. Also, my team lost the game, which feels all kinds of shitty considering you're just at the mercy of random luck when it comes to searching, and the random moves of your AI team. Well, let's move on to Pirate Treasure Hunt. Here we get the same kind of vague explanation of the game as we did with the first. As far as I could tell, this game was exactly the same as the first, but with the format changed slightly. Instead of collecting treasure as a team, it's every baby for themselves. The first baby to collect every piece of treasure wins. Once again, Grandpa and Spike return as randomly roaming characters, but now Susie Carmichael is alongside them too. Thankfully, in this board I got to see what all of those characters do. Running into Spike allows you to ride him, running into Grandpa Lou grants the player some cookies, and running into Susie allows the player to purchase a piece of treasure in exchange for said cookies. No idea whether Grandpa Lou and Spike have the exact same function in the previous game though. Outside of Susie's appearance, this is identical to Angelica's temple. Even this being non-team based doesn't change too much, because I was just running around solo despite technically being in a team. Although at some point a sort of minigame randomly played out for one of the other characters, I was genuinely mind blown as this happened, and I'm still not exactly sure what was going on. I think this was the devs' attempt at offering some different ways of collecting the treasure pieces. Would have been nice to see some sort of explanation though, because I have no clue whether it was required to play this minigame and buy a treasure piece from Susie, or whether you could still just win via searching. If you could still win just by searching, there's no real reason to explore the game board. This is something the AI-controlled Chucky did here, literally walking around in a circle in this one small patch for what felt like the whole game. To win the game, you need to collect specific treasure pieces, which result in you coming across pieces you've already collected. I believe all of this searching stuff is RNG based, so you're basically at the mercy of random dice rolls while trying to find a needle in a haystack. The games last forever, and mercifully Chucky won this game after flawlessly executing the walk around in circles infinitely strategy. I think that was the strategy that Beth Harmon utilised throughout the hit Netflix series The Scavenger's Gambit. Ah yes, we see Beth Harmon here opening with the classic walk in circles Sicilian. This will really pay off in the endgame. Last, and quite possibly least, we come to Reptar Rally. I wasn't expecting much after the first two games, but I was brought back to life when, on the character select screen, each baby was given their own Reptar sonar. These character models are fucking horrifying. They are seriously hideous and disturbing. This is like the Rugrats equivalent of making your own self-insert fan OC Sonic the Hedgehog character. Once the excitement and pure terror of seeing these abominations wore off, the fact that Reptar Rally is yet again essentially the same board game set in. They continue the tradition of slightly tweaking the formula, but it barely matters. Here, instead of collecting like 5 items or whatever, you have to collect multiples of 3 different items. They also changed the board structure here slightly, with everybody moving around in a circle and landing on different gateways to unique places, where you again move around in circles. Weirdly, this level seems to take place in some sort of purgatory or limbo, or Yu-Gi-Oh! Shadow Realm. Makes sense, because seeing these Reptar babies is my idea of hell. The small tweaks to the format introduce some new mechanics, which would be welcome if the game explained anything. Instead, it just makes this game as confusing as when you first booted up Scavenger Hunt. Also, Reptar takes a turn in this game, but he's just running around in circles on his own little ring. None of the characters even interacted with him during my game, so I'm not sure what the point of him was. So after running around in circles for far too long, I finally succeeded in winning a game of Rugrats Scavenger Hunt, although I did come staggeringly close to choking it away. It's an understatement to say the gameplay was disappointing. It's actually probably an overstatement to call it gameplay. However, much of the joy of licensed games comes from the presentation side of things. The music, voice acting, recreation of iconic moments and locations. Search for Reptar did this almost perfectly, and as a result, it made up for its hit and miss gameplay. I have to say, Scavenger Hunt misses the mark with its presentation. Visually, the game is a big step down from Search for Reptar. The cutscenes are noticeably lower quality, and somehow Stu looks even more like a crackhead here. I don't think the graphics are too bad on the actual game board, but yeah, it's a bit jarring after kicking things off on the PS1. A weird visual aspect of the game is that the players who aren't currently having their turn are shrunk down into miniature versions on the board. These look horrifyingly bad in most situations. Phil and Lil are particularly awful in the second game.
Mum says it's my turn on the Xbox.
I did appreciate that they gave every character a unique outfit to match the visual theming of every board though. It's a nice touch that they really didn't have to include. Unfortunately, the disappointment doesn't just end with the visuals. I praised Search for Reptar for its dialogue, particularly the way the characters never seem to repeat themselves. Here, characters always repeat themselves. If I had to hear Lil say almost as good as Wormies one more time, I would have punted her into the sun.
Almost as good as Wormies.
Don't get me started on how many damn times I had to hear characters say the word cookies either.
Cookies, 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 cookies.
Some of the cutscene dialogue is baffling too. This line from Dee Dee in particular was the real show stealer.
According to Dr. Lipschitz, babies need plenty of sleep.
What a bloody revelation, Dee Dee! The real saving grace here is that Mark Mothersbaugh returned to contribute to the music, so the soundtrack is spot on yet again. It helps make the endless board games slightly less dull. The board games suck. Just purely judged as board games, what Real-Time Associates have come up with here is pure garbage. If this was a physical game you could buy and play, it would still be complete trash. The worst games to play in my video game history videos are the ones that are just plain boring. I love to gush over games that surprise me and manage to be really good, while on the flip side, the games that are a mess are fun to pick apart. The boring ones, on the other hand, just send me to sleep. It didn't take too long to experience everything Scavenger Hunt had to offer, but it somehow managed to feel like a lifetime. There is genuinely no reason to play this game. None. Nothing about it is good or slightly interesting. I'm pretty sure subjecting your child to this video game back in the 90s could result in Child Protective Services being called on you. Next time, we'll be looking at Rugrats Studio Tour. This is the spiritual sequel to Search for Reptar, and was one of the most important games of my childhood. I put an insane amount of hours into this game growing up, and is probably the sole game responsible for my obsession with video games based on animated shows. Will it live up to the lofty standards it occupies in my memories? Make sure you subscribe to find out.